like, subscribe in the Discovery Channel. Yes, the Discovery Channel. The link is provided below. I titled this video, A Neighborly Move. Now, why would I title a video, A Neighborly Move? Because I want to question, did the neighbor of Asha agree if that neighbor that told the father, stated on the father's 911 call that the neighbor said that they seen Asha around the time when the father made the 911 call? I want to know if that neighbor still lives there today, or if they moved at any time percentage pertaining to Asha going missing. Does that neighbor still live there today, or did the neighbor move out somewhere during a time period after, say, when Asha went missing? Back February 14th, 2040, was it 35, 40 degree hypothermia type of temperature with no coat on? The neighbor stated, once again, Asha Degree's neighbor stated that they saw Asha somewhere right around the time, yes, time specifically around the time that Asha's father himself made the 911 call. So if he made the 911 call into dispatch somewhere around 6:35, 6:38 a.m., and yet so many eyewitnesses claim to have saw her around 4 a.m., how could that eyewitness, the neighbor on the same streets such as Asha's family and father, how could that eyewitness say that they seen Asha around 6 a.m. when everybody else saw Asha somewhere before around 4 a.m.? How does that happen? But not only that, and me questioning, yes, it was documented in the transcript. I saw it for my own self, my own two eyes, about the fact that the father stated the neighbor said they saw her. The two timing of 4 a.m. and the timing of 4 a.m. when the eyewitnesses stated on Highway 18 to police when they said that they seen Asha at around 4 a.m. How does that neighbor also see this young child and yet say such to the father around the time of 6:35, 6:38, 6:39 a.m.? How does that happen? Because those two time frames don't align. They're in fact the opposite. They're not the same. There's a huge gap, time difference in even that, right? So in me saying something pertaining to that, I must ask the question, a neighborly move. Did the neighbor ever move out? So, has Asha's neighbor ever had access to the family home? Yes, I question the neighbor. Despite that me feeling and sensing and possibly believing that Asha's family could have had something to play a part of her going missing and possibly dead, if she's dead and not alive, right? Here in 2018, and yet I still question that neighbor. I've made how many videos in relation to the neighbor and the time frame of where it meets even your eyes for me standing here asking the question, how does a neighbor's time frame be out of line when the mother and father got out of bed and made the 911 call hours later? That don't add up. The time is by design in itself, as in me asking this question. Something about that is not right. It's revealing almost. That sort of thing, let me tell you. When I said it's revealing, how could a neighbor be there at 2? How could a neighbor be there at 4 a.m.? Hold on. How could a neighbor, wait a minute. How could a neighbor be that just don't seem right at all? Eyewitnesses stated they saw Asha at 4 a.m. And yet the neighbor told the father, which made the father pick up the 911, knowing that Asha was gone and missing. The timing is not right. So where was the neighbor? Was a neighbor outside when Asha went missing at 4 a.m.? And yet the parents didn't find out she was missing until 6:30 a.m.? I asked that before, how is the neighbor seeing Asia leaving at 4 a.m. and then never telling, going to tell the parents as even knocking on the door, and then telling the father that they saw her and standing there specifically not telling the parents they saw her hours before? How is that? So let me go back right quick. I'm about to go back. So has Asia's neighbor ever had access to the Degree family home? That should be the main specific question. I should have asked that in the opening, but I had to put that there just enough for you to make sense, because that's an unravel right there. Has Asia's neighbor, the one that's seen her, remember that's the number one key link in all this, because that first neighbor was in fact the very first eyewitness. Watch it. It's why I'm calling this sort of thing out. If you see a child and you are a neighbor and you're seeing the child leave at whatever time she did, that's in fact say you were the number one eyewitness, because you saw her as soon as she came out of the house, just enough to make her way down a road. So that neighbor is in fact number one eyewitness, which is why I go back and question, has Asia's neighbor ever had access to the Degree family home? Has a neighbor ever been inside the home? Has a neighbor ever stood outside the front door besides just the day that, say, Asia went missing? Does that make sense? Have that neighbor ever had any type of inside access to getting into the home, such as Asia Degree's home, and possibly having a key to turn to get in and out of that home? That's a good question from my end. Because to say you were number one in all this mess, dear neighbor, eyewitness, number one eyewitness, leaving a child, seeing a child leave out, right? That's to say you were number one in witnessing all this. So, yep, my question is in fact a stretch, and it should be. Because for a neighbor to live that close, it's to say that neighbor possibly could have in fact had some type of relationship or something with a Asia Degree. Does that not, or does it make sense? Because not anywhere on YouTube am I seeing with my very two own eyes this sort of question being asked. A neighbor, possibly friendly neighbor, just enough to wait to tell the parents that the child was seen going down the road. Who waits? Because that's an issue that poses problem even in waiting. Seeing a 9-year-old leave out, go down your road, and you're the neighbor watching her 4 a.m. or even 6:30 a.m. as that neighbor stated, somewhere around 6:35, 6:38 a.m. going down the block, and then waiting to tell the parents, are you serious? That poses a problem, because for somebody to wait, see, this is where the issue lies pertaining to a neighbor not speaking much more sooner. That's why a neighbor should want to speak sooner and not hold back information, because look, if I am the viewer watching myself and I'm able to say tie information together, so is FBI and police, to not say that you were a neighbor and saw a child before, as in contact the parents before, is to say you possibly may have had something to do with that sort of thing, as in a child going missing or possibly killing her by accident with your car or something. Dear neighbor, dear friendly neighbor of Asia Degree and the Degree family, where is the neighbor at? Where is that neighbor at today in 2018, or even back then? If you don't not even report, but if you don't go bang on the door or offer a phone call to a Degree family or something, that's to say that even a neighbor could have played in the disappearance of a child. Because if the eyewitness account wasn't off, right? I'm going back and forth because the case goes back and forth. So if the eyewitnesses was, say if the eyewitness account, all the accounts of Asia Degree being on Highway 18, if those eyewitnesses were specific and actually verified truth of Asia being out at 4 a.m., then that's to say that that neighbor had to in fact have been out at 4 a.m. as well. The very first eyewitness neighbor who said that they saw Asia walking down the road, that neighbor had to either be away from home as in driving along Highway 18 and going home, I'm thinking that will be on record at, yes, at the office of police or chief of police or the sheriff department or somewhere. Or say that first eyewitness, the neighbor, that would have been documented that the neighbor was out much more earlier and much more sooner and shouldn't have waited to contact the parents about a child leaving at 4 a.m. That is to, in fact, say, if the eyewitness accounts are true of Asia being on Highway 18, then that neighbor would have been out as well at 4 a.m. And either on Highway 18 and seeing her, or at home, in their own home. And I stated that before, and they would have been there at 4 a.m. So where's the neighbor at today, and where was a neighbor at back then? Did they ever move out of their house is what I'm trying to ask. Because if the family had nothing to do with this, remember, to move around and trying to solve is to say who was where, when, at what time. And identity like me can even pull that apart as in the abstraction from all the way over here in a whole different city, county, state, where I never even lived in North Carolina myself, trying to figure out where was a neighbor at. Where could the neighbor have been at 4 a.m. if they were out at 4 a.m. and not 6:35, 6:38 a.m.? Or did Asia's father lie and say that the neighbor was out? Did the father lie and say that the neighbor supposedly seen Asia? Because even that would have to be documented as well, enough for even the police to even question that neighbor, as an interview that neighbor of what they seen and why. That had to have been interviewed, I'm thinking, by police, FBI, or whoever, that neighbor, and the time account adding up with the father's time account, because all that has to align. It has to, should be, as in even being verified, of the neighbor's whereabouts in the specified time of 4 a.m. Were they out at 4 a.m. or was that neighbor out at 6:30, right before 6:30 a.m.? That has to in fact line. That's a print right there. So, and me saying that, I want to know if that neighbor ever moved. I want to know if the neighbor ever moved out of the house on the same street or wherever that neighbor lived, right around in the proximity of the Degree family. Because that will tell as well. If a friendly neighbor moves into a place and something happens with a child, and say they move out of a place, and a year to 2 years of a child going missing is to say something even with that, even if the neighbor moved out before. You got to look at the people for what it is. Some people can't look at situations in the way I can, pertaining to angles of who could have did what, and these people in this mess. So, hold on. Yes, I asked that. Could a neighbor have had access to the Degree family? Do you think that that neighbor at any time, daylight savings time, or maybe not, could that neighbor, Asia's neighbor, have had access with little young Asia? And not only that, could that neighbor have been overly friendly with not only the Degree family, but also over friendly with Asia herself? How much did the neighbor know Asia? I'm in question of even that aspect. How much did that neighbor, just enough to come out their mouth and tell the family to their face that you're looking for Asia? I saw her walking down the road. I saw a child walking down the road, as it was stated on the father's 911 transcript call, when they noticed that she was gone at 6:30 a.m., 6:35 a.m., 6:37 a.m., 6:39 a.m., when the parents made the 911 call. Yes, someone may or may not have seen such as, say, if a neighbor was overly friendly with Asia, or just friendly wise with Asia, period, the neighbor, I'm saying, even if the neighbor had somewhat type of contact with Asia or so, with grooming, if a neighbor let me see, if a neighbor has access to a young child when nobody's around, say when a young child is out at play in the daytime, like I'm sitting right here, and say I see a young child or something, and I'm a neighbor, and it's my other neighbor's child, and I'm just out about, or even I'm from inside the house, and say I want to have access to that young child, what type of way would I form an attachment to that child, such as a grooming process? If I was a neighbor and say I either wanted to take a child and I wanted to say groom a child, even if it's not behind closed doors and even if it's out in public, where maybe other individuals could have seen that sort of thing, or maybe not. See, that's the question, even how friendly was the neighbor once again with Asia? Because I'm thinking a grooming process could even have went down with even a neighbor. Yes, a neighbor. The neighbor I just spoke of in the beginning of this video. A grooming process could have went down with a neighbor such as that. But it all depends on how friendly the neighbor was with the child to begin with. Say if they had access into the Degree family home, and say if they had a key to get in that home, or maybe not, say if they just groomed her from possibly outside as in outdoors while she was at play or something, or calling her over, come here, Asia. That's why the proximity counts in, because that's to ask once again, how close did that neighbor live to the Degree family, or how far off did that neighbor live away from the Degree family? That's a question that can't really stand still. That's in motion as well. On this tape, when you push play, it's going to be in motion. Or even you're asking that the proximity of the Degree family home pertaining to this neighbor that said that they were out, and yet, yes, based upon the father's transcript, 911 transcript, with the timing being off, that's completely full-fledged blasted, not going together as in the fitting piece, with even the father stating what the neighbor had seen, because the timing is off. That is all off. Have I ever played chess in life? I know you possibly asking that the way that I think. Have I ever been a chess player in life? Possibly so, who knows? But all this is skipping over each other and moving forward and back, and even that. Chess. Yes, chess. That's what it all looks like, this case in itself. So, if you're moving forward and back, it's to say chess could possibly have been played on my end, as in figuring out where these loose screws and all this other stuff don't add up, pertaining to even the measurement of this. The neighbor. Where is the neighbor at? Where's the neighbor at today? Somebody tell me, where's the neighbor? Would a neighbor, a friendly neighbor at that, would they have been bold enough to even groom Asia outside, as in outdoors, where it could have been seen by onlookers, or maybe not? Would they have did that sort of thing? Was that neighbor, I'm wondering if that neighbor was a grown man or a woman. I question that. It's good to question. It always is. That's how you learn. Questioning will, in fact, provide answers over time, even if it's years later, let me tell you. Because I'm thinking, nobody stated anywhere of whether they found any shoes or anything like that found in the atmosphere by, say, left behind by a young Asia or anything. There was a case I was watching. Yes, I was, pertaining to a little girl who had went missing, and come to find out, the child's mother, her boyfriend, has something to do with that. And not only that, the little girl, I guess, was playing in a truck that was up on, how you place a truck or something, you mount it up on something like, say, cinder blocks or something. People do that sort of thing. They mount their vehicles up on trucks and stuff, and it'll just be parked sitting there wasting away the vehicle, right? And so the child's shoes, such as her house shoes, was left behind in that vehicle. And that's why I had questioned even this pertaining to if Asia would have lost a shoe. I asked that in the other video, if she would have lost a shoe behind anywhere. And when I read that blog, the Finding Asia Degree blog, when the woman running the blog, she looks like she's trying to somewhat do a demonstration. I don't know her personally, right? But I saw a shoe in the photo, which is why I was questioning on even that. Could Asia at any time left it was a photo of a shoe, right, on the woman's blog, but at any time have left that sort of thing behind? I don't think so, because I'm thinking even police would have stated that in the report and all that, how the child's shoe was left somewhere. But if a child's shoe was to be left somewhere, I would consider she was either carried off by somebody, she was either snatched, or possibly even hit by a car enough for a shoe to fly off a foot. If you hit somebody, if you're going at a fast enough rate speed and you hit somebody and say a shoe, a shoe is left behind, that's to say an impact would have flown the young child into the air, and not only just that, her shoe as well. That's why I question that, because when I was looking at the case about the little girl and her house shoes left behind, I was like, and then when I saw the Finding Asia Degree and she had a shoe demonstration, but I don't think that's Asia's shoe. She was just using that as an example, right? Or the type of shoe that Asia possibly wore when she left out. I just was questioning that. Even if police found a shoe and it wasn't released to the public, that was to say that somebody possibly could have even hit the child, and a shoe as well as a body went flying in the air and the shoe was just left behind. But I would still have to question the neighbor even on that, as in me tying that in, stringing that into that as well, the abstraction. Or if police, FBI would have found a shoe of Asia's, could that neighbor have been out at that time, accidentally hit her, and then possibly tried to cover themselves? But I'm thinking would a neighbor want to even tell the parents if they said committed an accident? Because even a neighbor would know that they're going to be questioned, just like I'm questioning today. Which it actually flips back. The matching card, in fact, flips back towards the father. Why would the father say that the neighbor said that they seen her and then the timing be off? That's spread loose. I just did some chess on you and you just didn't even see. Did you see it or did you not see? Were you in fact matching stuff up and flipping over stuff to see who is doing what and why? Would that neighbor have had groomed Asia? Because I really don't think so, or even in that. The neighbor could, because that's close proximity, that's access, right? That would just be a disaster in itself, because see, something about that would even be off, pertaining back to the home life or even the family, of whether molestation stood there or not. You got to be able to even zoom in and look further, even pertaining to that. If a neighbor was close enough to groom Asia, because I still can't see Asia wanting to leave her home unless some form of abuse stood in the family's home, her own family home. Even if a neighbor wanted to groom her. I question what was the neighbor's, not just the neighbor's identity. I'm going to question further if the neighbor could have moved out, right? But I'm questioning what type of work that neighbor could have did or have been involved in. Because for even a shovel to be used for something to dig up is to once again say that somebody had to return back home to get that shovel. if they didn't plan all this mess before. But if somebody had to need to have a shovel, they had to go back home to get the shovel. If they didn't plan all this mess before, so the home would have to been around that area, the proximity of where the woods is, Highway 18 is, or somewhere around the Degree family home, if it's not the Degree family themselves who committed the crime. If all was planned, then the shovel, as I said in my last video, would have been placed in the car, I'm thinking that same night or something, of when they were going to take Asia's body or something. That's why the neighbor has to be questioned specifically of what type of work did that neighbor do and why. How well would Asia have known that neighbor? For that neighbor to be possibly calling up sometime saying, hey, young girl, come here. Or come here, Asia. That's why it helps to question, again, I'm repeating, it helps to question the proximity of the homes, as in the side by side, and how far apart are they, as well as how far along the way that the neighbor lived from where Asia was leaving. And not only that, which direction did even that neighbor live in pertaining to the walk that Asia took. That all points together, let me tell you. And so here's my question. Hold on. Yep, does the neighbor still live on the same street? I asked that in the beginning of the video. Does that individual still carry out the same day-to-day actions and activities in which they were when Asia went missing February 14, 2000? Did anything pertaining to that neighbor ever change after that child went missing? That gets factored in as well. Did anything change or become hindered or anything pertaining to activities in relation to when Asia Degree went missing February 14, 2000? That's questionable. I would love to know where that neighbor of Asia's resides in 2018. Where are they? Did they decide to move away from the area? Did they move off that road? As in the same road or street that Asia lived on? Did they decide to move months after all happened to Asia? Are they still there, or did they move months after? Did they move 1 or 2 years after Asia went missing? That's a number one key question. Does the neighbor that's the thing. That's more important. Listen to me when I say this, because people don't pay attention enough. I stated that. Anytime a child goes missing, that can be verified as well pertaining to, say, a young child such as an Asia Degree going missing. Did anything change pertaining to the neighbors that surrounded the area? Did anything move, as in out of place, pertaining to those neighbors? Any of them? Such as actions, behaviors, any of that type of thing. I can align those pieces together in the strategy myself, and trying to figure out whether somebody did anything, whether they could have, got a new place of residency. I'm trying to think. You, the viewer, will know where I'm going with this. When a young child goes missing, and a neighbor, because I remember when I said there's habits formed in the way that a neighbor would move or something, not moving out of a house, but if a neighbor is in and out of a house at that time when Asia went missing, is to ask, why was that neighbor there to begin with, coming in and out at that precise time? Because usually even neighbors have habits on work days, as in them going to work and leaving out of the house, or coming home, if they're coming from a party, usually that sort of thing happens on the weekends, right? But that's to say that habits are in fact formed in that a neighbor coming in and out at specific times. And not only that, even a neighbor's habits possibly changing even day to day, even pertaining to a child going missing or something. Does that sound right? If a neighbor has something to do with a child going missing, then I'm thinking that neighbor would in fact change their activities or something. Or possibly wait or something until later so that they're not found out right away or something. Let me try to see how the neighbor, let me think for a second. Because I'm thinking if a neighbor was to say took a child or possibly killed the child by accident or had anything to do with the child's whereabouts or something, I'm thinking that neighbor wouldn't just change up right away or something. I'm thinking a neighbor would in fact wait or something so that they wouldn't be found out or something. I'm thinking, would a neighbor just move out right around the time period that Asia go missing, or even start doing stuff differently that other neighbors and even possibly the Degree family would pay attention to as in notice? Would a neighbor wait a few months or possibly a year to 2 years to say move out, so that maybe the Degree family, say if the neighbor has something to do with it, you got to look at who could have did something. So that's why I ask at all sides, despite me thinking that the family has something to do with the child going missing. Would the neighbor just all of a sudden, once the child goes missing, would they just abruptly move out? Or would they just abruptly say, change the location of them doing things in relation to their environment and who they're interacting with at that time, amongst not just the Degree family, but amongst even them own self living in that environment, vicinity? That's questionable. Because let me think, if a neighbor would have accidentally hit Asia with their car, I'm thinking that sort of thing would have put that person in panic. But I don't think they would have reported that they seen Asia to Asia's father. No, I don't think that. I do not think that. I don't think a neighbor who would have, let me think. I'm falling off of course myself. Because I just put that right there an accident, because I didn't write that in no notes, right? I don't think. But I don't think if, say, the neighbor, let's consider that, if the neighbor accidentally killed Asia with their car or something, I don't think that neighbor would have told the father that they seen her. Because that will be shame in that as well as remorse in that. So the neighbor more than likely would have not said anything at all. The neighbor would just have let the parents look for the child and that be that. But even if the neighbor, say, groomed the young girl, such as, say, a neighbor possibly groom a young girl, take her somewhere, rape her or something, and then throw her body somewhere or something with her, get rid of her and then bury her back, I still can't see a neighbor telling a father, the child's father, that he's seen her. Whatever this neighbor was, whether it was a male or female, I still can't see that neighbor stating that to that father. It depends. It in fact depends. I just can't see that. That's where it gets kind of iffy at. Don't it appear like I got loose screws? I know, because I'm able to examine all the way down to the core. But that's where it gets iffy at, because a neighbor, the only way I can see a neighbor telling the father that the neighbor seen the child is if the neighbor had, let me see, possibly will want to have take their eyes off of themselves and say throw it at somebody else. Say if they killed her or something by accident. But I still can't see a neighbor doing that. Because I don't even think a neighbor would even think that far to begin with. It all depends. All this depends. It does depends on the individual. But I'm thinking a neighbor will have too much remorse if they kill a child by accident, just enough not to even say or something. They might just move on, go on, be about their business and never say, and then try to cover themselves up or something, and then move out. As in move, possibly wait a while or wait a long time and then move out and be gone up out the atmosphere. The neighbor, I'm saying. Which is why I question if the neighbor's still there today, if they left, or if they did move, how many years after did the neighbor move? Could it have been within the 1 or 2 year time span? Because a neighbor might still even be living there. Who knows? The age is questionable of that neighbor as well. I feel that the family has something to do with that. But as I stated before, and I'm repeating again, because some people don't even think about this. Some people don't even consider this. See, if a child up and leaves, as in leaves out the house and then disappears, and then a neighbor ups and leaves by moving away within a year to 2 year time period, or even before, when a child goes missing, such as in a disappearance of a young child, is to say again the person could have done something with that child, such as the neighbor themselves. That's why I asked that. Because if a child goes and disappears and nobody ever sees her again, and then the neighbor moves before the time period 1 to 2 years, say before that time, or even between 1 to 2 years, or even going up into the 3 year mark, is to say that neighbor could have done something with that child. Because either the neighbor will hold some remorse by ways of an accidental death, or just not want to be seen if it was a purpose death, such as a neighbor possibly grooming the child and getting them out of the house, living that close, and them not wanting them to be found out. They will possibly even move away up 1 to 2 years, or possibly before, or somewhere along the 3 year mark of moving. I can go out as far to say if a neighbor has remorse and say they accidentally killed a child by ways of an accident or something like that, I can even span up to a 5 year mark. A 5 year mark. Because see, we all human beings have a conscious, but a psychopath doesn't. A psychopath does not have a conscious. So when they do things, they don't care. They'll kill somebody by ways of purpose or accident, and then they will in fact sleep good at night. Even like a Casey Anthony. The Casey Anthony trial, I would love to speak about that, because I will rip that all in shreds just to see possibly who did what. And more than likely Casey Anthony herself. She looks like a nutbag. But I'm just saying, Casey Anthony, even if she killed her own child, that's to say that she could be in fact a psychopath. She has to, because as she stated herself, she rests good at night. She rests good at night. So that's to in fact to say that even Casey Anthony is a psychopath, whether she killed her child or she didn't kill her child. Because no parent is going to say have a child end up dead and say even if she had nothing to do with it, be able to still sleep at night. Because a parent would in fact, however many years, will still be grieving her child. So how can you say that you are sleeping good at night? You're resting good at night and sleeping good at night, dear Casey Anthony. Yes, the Casey Anthony trial. But that's to say the same thing even about a neighbor. If a neighbor, I said I can stretch it from 1 to 2 years all the way up to 5 years. Because say if it was an accidental death and a neighbor has conscience and is not a psychopath, psychopaths ain't able to feel emotion. That's why they kill in the first place. They able to feel something to a point, but not like you and I, right? But that's to say that if an accident went down and that individual neighbor is not a psychopath, and say they accidentally struck Asia with their car, that will be remorse, and it will eat at the conscience of that man or woman. I'm thinking possibly the neighbor was a man, I don't know. That would eat at their conscience enough to make them want to move out, move away as well. Because remorse would in fact be there, and some individuals can't live, I'm thinking, with that sort of thing, not for long, knowing that that is playing and preying on your own conscience. Yes, to not move or something, knowing that you just struck and killed a child, an innocent child at that. So that's only if that individual is innocent with conscious enough to feel remorse, the neighbor I'm speaking on. But if that sort of thing didn't happen, it's a still question right now. Did the neighbor at any time move out? The reason why I said 5 years, because I said the conscience could be eaten away by guilt. Waking up in the morning, standing, looking in the mirror, knowing that you killed a child, and you're living amongst a family too. And not only that, you're seeing the other sibling, and possibly as you're seeing that other sibling, such as Asia's brother O'Brien, as he's outside playing with other kids, you're possibly thinking all the wrong that you have done by killing that little girl. And I'm thinking that would in fact make a neighbor feel remorseful if an accident was to play out, such as that. They would in fact want to leave, pack all bags and possibly a moving truck and be gone. Somewhere in the year time frame, 1 to 2 years or 2 to 5 years. But I'm thinking they will in fact have wanted to move sooner, because people that hold remorse can't live with that sort of thing. And not seeing the mother and father come in and out of the driveway, wherever they park their car, coming in and out of their home, and being out in the summertime, knowing you got to see them every time you see them. That will kill somebody, possibly heart attack or stroke, and remorse. Or say if it was an accident by a neighbor, they wouldn't be able to live with themselves for long, I don't think. No. Not a remorseful, good individual in society. No. No, I don't think so. A neighbor would have wanted to be out. Because the reason why I say that a neighbor would, because see, look, once a neighbor or somebody strikes a child and kill her by ways of accident and not purposeful, that's to say that grown man would, or woman, or whatever the neighbor was, would have in fact had to pick that lifeless body of that child up off the ground. If they would have hit her or something, they would have had to pick the child up off the ground. The rain was already there to clean up the mess, such as blood anyway. The torrential downpour would have handled some of that somewhat, such as a blood smearing across the road. But they would have had to handle her body, picking it up off the ground and sitting it somewhere in the car, maybe back seat, or possibly even in the trunk, right? And I'm thinking somebody would have seen that or something. Her placing if it was a her, yes. If the individual, I wonder about the neighbor. Her placing the body, was that neighbor a male or a female? Because something, when I ask this, you got to understand when I'm asking this. Because see, look, men usually don't pay attention to that sort of, has anybody ever noticed how nonchalant men usually are? Coming and going, depending on the only way, let me go back. Women are usually caring enough to say, you're looking for Asia, I just seen her walking down the road, which is why I'm saying it could have possibly been a female, the neighbor. Would that been a female, or would that have been a male? The neighbor is going to have to be questioned even a little bit more further, because see, look, ouch, my leg. I got my leg up on the dashboard, right? Men usually try not to put themselves. That's why I'm asking if that sort of individual was a female. Because see, men usually, they're nonchalant. Listen to me when I say that. they're nonchalant usually to that type of thing of, say, it depends on the situation and how the mother or the father came out and who came out first, came out of the house looking for Asia. Was it the mother that came out first, or was it the father? Because grown men usually let that sort of thing bypass their eyes, as even them not saying anything, which is why I said she. A she more than likely will pay attention, because remember, to be a woman is to identify with a female child. That wasn't a little boy coming out, right? So if a male took the time to tell the father, you're looking for her, I just seen her or saw her walk wherever down the road, that male would in fact identify with that other male, right? Despite that being a little girl. But I'm thinking somebody that's caring enough will be female or something. So we would have to ask police once again, was that a female? I want you, the viewer, to think about this, because I'm not able to see who was that first number one eyewitness of, because let me think. If it was a female. Hold on. And a female, say if a female hits a child, right? The female will be caring enough. Would a man be caring enough? A female will be caring enough just to pick a child, lifeless body up, as I stated before, off the ground, if they hit and killed her, right? And put her in the back seat or put her in the trunk of the car, one or the two. But you have to ask the identification pertaining to male versus female. Would a male identify with a man saying, okay, you're looking for your child, I just seen her? Or would a female be more forward in that and come out and say, you're looking for her, I just saw her? Because it depends on, listen to me when I say this, it depends on who came out of the house first. Was it Asia's mother that came out of the house first, or was it the father? And then who stood there as whoever was running around? Did the mother run around all up and down the street, or was the father? I think the father possibly stood there as the neighbor, him or herself, stood there. But it's still, once again, dependent on the, because I'm thinking a grown man, if he hits a young child, usually men are nonchalant. If this neighbor is, listen to me when I say, if this neighbor is a black male, I'm thinking he possibly would have not wanted to get involved in that sort of thing as putting his hands, lifting up a lifeless, that's why I said female. A female would do that sort of thing or something. Because look, a vehicle would even point in that. A vehicle would in fact point in that if a neighbor. So if a neighbor never changed cars, switched cars, let's just say that that neighbor possibly that sort of thing didn't happen. I'm going along, stringing all along, because I'm trying to see, yes, the back and forth nature. Male or female. Who was the actual neighbor? A black male would not want, I'm thinking, hold on, wait a minute. A black male would not want his hands on any child, putting her in the back of his car after he done accidentally killed her, or possibly in the trunk. I'm thinking he would want to put that child in the trunk because blood more than likely would be everywhere. And to hit something is to say blood could in fact be there. And it would in fact get on the carpeting and everything else in the car or something, right? Let me think. I'm thinking a male, a black male. If that neighbor was black, a black male would possibly left her body there or something. Would have, if he accidentally struck and killed her, he possibly would have left her there, or even got out the car and drugged her over somewhere. And I really couldn't see him just planning all that stuff like that. That's too much, because he would have possibly went somewhere and hid his car. That just seemed like that's too much for even a neighbor to do. It seemed like this is swinging every which way, and yet it should, because it don't, something is not right about that. I can see a female, as I stated, a female could have, because see, this is odd in itself, me with this example, because I didn't write this in my notes, which is why I'm going back and forth. But I could see a female picking a child up with her lifeless body, right? Young Asia picking her up and setting her somewhere in it, because females are more caring, right? Females are more caring. I'm thinking the female would have possibly put the child in the back seat and not in the trunk, because females are more nurturing. They pay attention to that, and even if they have children, they will possibly put her in the back seat and not the trunk if they didn't purposely kill her and running her over. But still, a car would still stand in that. See where I'm going? Whether the sex is a male or a female, a car would still stand in that. If it was a neighbor, a car would stand in that, as in police looking into that actual neighbor's car to see if blood or something was there, and if a neighbor would have gotten rid of a car in the process. You see what I'm saying? Where I'm going? Some people can't think this far, and even that. But it's all this swings every which way. It swings back and forth in every which way, and it should, and you're trying to figure out. Because if you don't go scope to scope like this and aligning pieces, that's how pieces sometimes get overlooked. What you're trying to see. Where I said, well, when a neighbor come out, who was in fact running through the neighborhood trying to find Asia? Was it the mother or the father? Because even connection could be made in that, such as a neighbor coming and being there and telling a father, I see you looking for Asia. I seen Asia wherever. That could have been a male or could have been a female. Because a female would be more emotionally connected in a sense. A female would more likely be trying to say, what's the word for it? Say something more, whereas men are known to be nonchalant. They care, but they don't. Men have an emotional connection to a certain whatever. So if that was a male, I can see that male's neighbor standing there with Asia's father only talking to a certain point. Talking to the father only to a certain point, because if he was male, he would only have so much emotional connection, knowing that women are more emotional beings. Me, I think more like a masculine man. I don't have as much emotion as the average woman, which is why I'm able to decipher like a man in abstraction. Does that make sense? So I'm trying to see how a woman would in fact have connected with that father, even in conversation about that young girl as she was standing there. She would possibly have, if she would possibly would have wanted to latch on to the father. Yes, a female emotional neighbor, if she was a female. Just enough to get, just enough to try to see why would Asia leave out the house in the first place, right? I'm saying the neighbor, yes. See why she left out in the first place? But just be a little bit more nosy or something. I'm thinking. Because women like to gossip, is what I'm trying to say. They like to do that type of thing. But I still sense and think, would a neighbor, if they had something to do with that, would they have told the father that they seen her to begin with? I think not. I don't really think so. Even if they groomed her, I don't think that. Because I'm thinking a father in his right mind will be looking at that man or woman and asking, what were you out at that time to begin with? And why? Because a father would know himself, or mother or whoever would know, why were you out that time to be seeing her? Why didn't you bang on our door sooner? And not only that, where were you going and why? What were you even doing? That's what a parent would think, right? With a neighbor. So I really don't think, I could be wrong, But I had to just question that because, see, nobody is questioning even this part of where I don't think that that neighbor could have did something, and yet I'm, in the way that I ask, it almost seems like it. Nobody is putting out videos or any blogs pertaining to step-by-step aspect, piece by piece, filling in the gap of the neighbor, of where was the neighbor, what sex was the neighbor, because there's people that's online today that live amongst a degree family, or was living amongst that family or in that environment, right? Just enough to say the sex and not name the individuals that lived on the street. One of them could have started a blog. They should have. And questioning this very thing, because they would have more detail pertaining to the sex of the neighbors. That's what I'm trying to say, and leaving the name out. Well, such and such a neighbor. No, there's nothing wrong legally about that. You wouldn't have gotten trouble in that because you're helping to solve a young child's case. You would just say the sex and possibly somewhat near the age and leave the name out of it. And you're not saying the name of the neighbors if you lived around the area. I think that family has something to do with that, and it's not telling. But the neighbor, I still have to question, because if we don't question that part, then that doesn't help the solving of the puzzle. If we still have to ask if the neighbor could have moved between a year or two, or up into 5 years. Did they move out of their house or get rid of cars? Yes, get rid of cars or anything like that. Did they get rid of a car? Or something like that, trade in a car, any of that. That still has to be asked. Because if you strike and kill somebody with something, as I say, you might have gotten rid of even your car, went and had it cleaned out, or you cleaned it yourself and got rid of it. Something. That's why that part, it fits in. All this fits in with a very huge puzzle, the Asia degree puzzle. Let me see. Man, because people don't be questioning. People be, should I go question a neighbor myself? As in contact a neighbor myself, because people, they live in fear and asking. I don't fear anybody. I don't fear Asia's parents. I don't fear that neighbor. I don't really fear anybody, because anytime you say, dear public, we the FBI want to know, can you help us find us, or bring such and such home, then what is there to fear? You don't fear anybody's family or any of that and that, because a child could be even alive, and I don't think Asia Degree is. She's possibly dead. But either one of these children amongst us that went missing or disappearing could still be alive, and if you fear somebody, that's to say they might not even come back. They can be ending up dead in the process. Or where you was scared to question. I don't fear anything. I don't fear nobody. There ain't no point in that. I don't care who it is. It could be, no offense towards anybody, but I don't even fear Jesus Christ. So many in fact do, and yet I don't. That's not to be disrespectful. I don't practice religion, but I don't have time to fear anything. I don't even fear God itself. Why would I do that? If I'm going to live, how am I going to live wholeheartedly fearing everything amongst me and around me? That's why the world can't move further, because everybody just lives, breathe, sleep, and eat in fear. I don't fear no supreme being of no type. I can't. Because if that's the case, I would never make a move myself in anything I'm trying to do, such as even getting out of bed in the morning, brushing my teeth, or some people are living fear of even doing that, and thinking how they're going to be judged in the way that they're doing it. And yet, who cares once you get outside? So, what? So you live in fear based upon how somebody is going to judge you. And yet many of them individuals who you fear are going to judge you, and even going around questioning or just living your life, many of them individuals are in fact failures. They're failures by choice, so why fear them? They're not doing anything with their life, so you might as well just live as you're going to with no fear involved. A man, woman, family, neighbor, God, anything. Why? Because to fear everything and not live the way you want to is to in fact cut your own life short in the process. letting fear block what you're supposed to do, even if it involves some life purpose and you're getting things done. I don't have time to fear. I just don't. I don't care. I don't care. And at time I can be a careless individual in that. And I should be, because if something's going to block me and what I'm trying to do and figuring out these children and them missing, that's to say something could in fact be wrong with me. I'm not living my purpose. I'm letting things get in the way. Anyways, so I'm guessing the neighbor must still live on the street. Let me just call it at that. The neighbor must be still living on the street. Here we are almost, what is this? Asia been missing for 18 years. Could the neighbor have moved out in the 10-year mark? That's a long ways away to just live somewhere if you had something to do with that sort of thing. And not only that, if the neighbor still lived there today, I'm thinking if they're not a psychopath, they might still just be there living. Asia's neighbor. Yep, I question everybody. I question everybody living in Asia's environment along that road and that street, not Highway 18, but on the same street that she lived on. Whether they call it a road or street or whatever, that she in fact lived on. I question everybody that lived in that environment and who may have moved out during a year of 1 to 5 years or 1 to 2 years or any time before that. I question everybody on that block, that street, that road of Asia, or where she lived, and not all the way on Highway 18. I question everybody on that street. That's how you handle that. You question everybody. You make even police look outside of where even they might not have seen, as in individuals that have moved in and out after Asia done went missing, as in them moving fully out to get away, and that, and not just be looking at, oh well, Asia went missing, so let's just question the family and let's question that green Ford Thunderbird or 1970, it was a 1973 Lincoln Continental. Let's just question just the parents, that green car, and possibly sex trafficking or something. No, we're going to question even further. We're going to question everybody that lived on the same street as a Degree family themselves, and who may have moved out in the process when the child went missing, as in house to house, every single house on that block. That's the way I handle things, and I look at stuff in the abstraction. Who moved out during the time period after the child went missing, 1 to 2 years after she went missing, or 1 to 5 years in the time period, 1 to 3 years, 1 to 4 years? Who went moving out? I'm questioning that, and I should. Did anybody move out on the road in the street that Asia Degree lived on, outside of that neighbor? Any other individual that possibly lived across the street and down the ways away, did they move out at any time in that timely year span? Because see, that's how some people go completely unrecognized. And even that, the description of, say, somebody living on a street and then moving trucks pulling up for them to move out, and then them carrying on, and them individuals could have done something with the young child, and people not even recognizing even that as it's happening. And then they make themselves along the way out of the premises or whatnot, and then the Degree family or whatnot say if they had nothing to do with it, there you have it. Is an extra mess of where somebody possibly left and moved out. But if nobody moved out on the same road within 1 to 2 years or 1 to 5 years, 2 to 5 years, then that's to say maybe they didn't have anything to do with Asia going missing. I look at, yes I do. Think I don't. That's why many people don't like my mind and the abstraction of even that. Because I ask, well, you ask all the right questions, but you ask it at the wrong time. No, I ask all the right questions at the right time. Don't get mad at me where you fail to ask the wrong questions. Do not get mad at me where you yourself fail to ask the right questions at the right time, layer by layer. Where was the neighbor? I wonder where that neighbor was when they was walking up on the father or getting into. I mean, was a neighbor in a car by their house, or where were they when they noticed that the parents, Asia's parents, the neighbor that said that they seen her, when the neighbor said that they seen her around. The neighbor didn't say a time frame. I'm saying this neighbor told Asia's parents somewhere around 6:35, 6:38, just enough for the father to make the 6:39 911 call to dispatch. Yes, based upon the neighbor account seeing Asia leave. Not only that, where was the neighbor standing at as the neighbor was telling this father this information? That has to go in as well. Whoever is mad when I ask that can stay mad on top of that. Where was his neighbor standing at? Was a neighbor standing next to a car? Was a neighbor standing next to a home? Was a neighbor standing on a sidewalk? If they have sidewalks, was a neighbor standing on a grass, such as a front lawn? Was a neighbor standing side by side with Asia's father? And them telling him that. Why I say telling her that? Because when I say her, what it is, why I keep saying her is because I keep seeing Asia's mother, and I don't know why. I keep seeing Asia's mother, and I don't want to say why on video. But yes, that's the number one reason why I keep saying her, because Asia's mother keep flying past. When I said the child's lifeless body of picking Asia up off the road, I could see Asia's mother, and I don't know why. And I ain't gonna say why, but I just leave her out of this. But I'm trying to figure out where the neighbor possibly could have stood while the neighbor was telling the father this sort of information pertaining to the child. Yes, them seeing the child. What point in position where did the neighbor stand precisely next to the father or a ways away from the father and telling him? Because see, that will point in whether that neighbor was just pulling up right there at that time. See where I'm filling in gaps, trying to figure out. I'm in fact filling in potholes on top of that, trying to figure out. If to say that a neighbor was standing outside with Asia's father, and say the mother or the father noticed the neighbor coming out of the house, making their way out of the house, or even the neighbor making their way out of a car and a father or something like that seeing them do that sort of thing, is to once again go in on the research and say, well, the neighbor, as in them being placed, that would in fact point you to where that neighbor could have been in the early mornings. If a neighbor was seen getting out of their car at around the time of 6:35, you gotta listen to me with this, because I'm trying to think. I don't think the neighbor had anything to do with it. No, I think that the family effect has something to do with it. But if that neighbor was getting out of their car and they told Asia's father this information, that's to say that even the neighbor or something could have been coming back after planting something. That's where something that hangs loose, as in the string, the detail. Because remember, for Asia to leave out of somewhere at 4 a.m. or so, and say supposedly she might have been seen by eyewitnesses, who knows, right? She may have been seen, or maybe not, by eyewitnesses around 4 a.m., 1.3 miles away from her home. Whoever would have did anything to Asia, if the family didn't plan it and somebody else did something to her, that's to say, let's bring a neighbor into this. That's to say that it would have taken a while after 4 a.m. for them to say rape the girl or molest the girl, possibly even kill the girl, right? And then that would give from around 4 something a.m. for her to make her way into a car, if she could have seen out of the woods in the dark with no flashlight, make her way out of a car, possibly get into somebody else's vehicle, such as a green car, and say if they kill her, raped her, molest her, whatever, they would have had to straw her things, such as the candy wrappers found on Highway 18, put her hair bow, pencil, and marker, yes, put her hair bow, pencil, marker, and her Mickey Mouse hair bow in the shed, as well as bury her bag and possibly her or whatever they would have did with her. That is a timely manner. It takes time for all that. So that's to say that more than likely that individual wouldn't have gotten done doing everything until maybe around 5:35. Let me see, 5:35. 5:20, let me see, 5:25, 5:30, 5:35, or maybe even 5:45, just enough to make their way back home somewhere going into around 6 a.m., depending on how much away the degree house is, as well as the neighbor. You see what I'm saying? If the father has something to do with it, or say the neighbor or another individual, how far approximately would it take for them to get from that area of doing all that? Because it takes time to rape or molest a child and then get rid of her or bury her or something. That's time. As well as putting all her stuff, scattering it like that. That takes time. So I'm thinking they would have gotten done, if they didn't plan it, if it wasn't the parents, they would have gotten done somewhere around 5:25, 5:30, 5:35. And then, however, around 5:35, somewhere around 5:25, 5:35, however ways or time frame it would have been for them to make their way back home amongst that area from a 1.3 miles, how long it would have taken for them to drive, whether they drove fast or slow, pulling up. That would have been somewhere around going into 6 a.m. the mark, because it don't take that long to drive from that area of, say, 1.3 miles or wherever back towards the same street the Degree family lived on. That wouldn't have been a ways of drive. I have never been in that location, but I'm counting the 1.3 miles to be able to say. That should have been, what, a 4-minute drive, maybe 5, not even that. I'm thinking 4 or 5-minute drive for somebody. And then that's why when I mentioned the neighbor as well as the father, who could have did what, because if the neighbor would have been standing next to their car getting out of the car, and they said that they saw Asia around the time, they didn't say the time, but say that they were standing there telling the father, well, you're looking for her, I just saw her, and say the father comes out of his house right then, the mother, that's to ask if the neighbor was just getting out of their car. Or did they just come out of the house seeing all of them? And that is strange in itself, as in that's telling as well, because it depends on if Asia's mother was out there screaming right on the street, just enough for that neighbor to just come and put themselves out in the environment to say, well, you were looking for her? I just saw her walking down the road. So I'm targeting where, in fact, did that neighbor stand in location. Once again, was it next to a car, getting out of a car? Was it on the front lawn? Was it stepping back out of your house? Yes, possibly after you just stepped foot into the house. What? Did you just pull up in your car? That all has to be questioned. You question all that, around all that. That is a target as well, the neighbor, I'm saying. Where was his footing or her footing pertaining to them coming out of something or going into something? Because if you overlook that part, that throws a lying piece out of, yes, it does. That in fact does. The layering aspect, there's layering in all of it. If you don't look as in how the neighbor was coming in or out of something, that has to tell in itself. That points even FBI in a direction of who could have did what. Did the neighbor come out after the mother was out yelling and screaming, going down the road, block herself looking for Asia, or when the father came out? What time and frame did the neighbor actually set foot on either ground and were at, and telling the father this information of when they saw the child? Because if you're a neighbor and you're going into somewhere, such as your home, as you're on the way coming back from somewhere, as to ask, dear neighbor, where were you at? Right then, when you were telling the father, where were you coming from? Right when you were telling the father. That, in fact, aligns. It aligns in the missing piece of even that abstraction. If you don't know something, ask me, because let me tell you, my thinking process is completely off the hook. As in me, that's why people don't be wanting me around, because people have told me, I can respect those if you want to use drugs, smoke weed, and all that other stuff. I don't do that type of thing because I need mental clarity and me being able to process my thinking processes, right? But I have, growing up along the way, you know how you have friends and they smoke weed and all that other stuff, and they pass you, you like, nah, I'm cool, because that's stuff like that don't make me feel too far away, right? So in me saying that, like, I've been known to mess up people's high. My friends, people today that I know, many of them, they around me that I know they don't use drugs. But the individuals in the past that have, which I wouldn't have them around me all like that, right? Because they would do things that was not legal, right? And so, and things towards others that wasn't right. But I would get to talking like this, how I'm talking, and questioning and analyzing stuff, and talking to them while they were smoking their weed, to the fact, yes, one of them in fact came out and said, you're messing up my high. They were mad at me, which is why we ended our friendship, because I'm like, if you need that much weed, that is going to in fact stunt your growth, and you're not being able to see what stands out here in this world, where somebody could easily take advantage of you if you're too high enough not to see that sort of thing. I need my mental clarity, which is why I don't smoke or none of that, because I got to be able to know who's around me and why, for what reason. They don't, people that smoke weed and all that, they don't like you asking all these questions. No, they don't. No, they do not. Trust and believe they don't. Because you mess up. They want to be laid back as they're smoking a blunt or something. They don't like that. That's so weird to me, because I said that in the other video when I said, well, how does that neighbor, wait a minute, how does the neighbor see Asia when she was leaving, knowing that she left around 3:30 or somewhere, just enough to make it down to Highway 18? I'm saying just enough to make it down to the 1.3 miles where other eyewitnesses saw her. That was around 3:34 a.m. Somewhere in that time period. Had to be somewhere around 3:30 or something, if eyewitnesses stated they saw her around 4 a.m. How does a neighbor say that they see her at that time before, just enough to tell the father around 6:35 or 6:38, tell that father to his face, they just seen her walking down the road? Ain't that 2 hours and a half or 2 hours or something a ways away? How do you do that sort of thing? That is not right. That is so completely off. Yeah, I asked that already. How does a neighbor, I would love to know today here in 2018, and even back on February 14, 2000, the day after February 14, 2000, I would have loved to ask that neighbor that told the father what they did in seeing her. I would love to know what that neighbor feels about Asia being gone or missing. I would have loved to ask that neighbor back then, but I didn't know too much, even myself, back then about Asia Degree. I found out years later, seeming she wasn't aired and showed as much as she should have been in her disappearance. She wasn't aired enough. on a TV screen for me to know about. But I would have loved to question the neighbor about that. Like, dear neighbor, what would you, the neighbor, yes, neighbor, they possibly is not going to see this video, but then again, you never know. Dear neighbor, how do you feel in 2018 about Asia still being gone? I wonder how would a neighbor feel, because guilt would in fact be there, knowing that you didn't intervene at that time when you saw her leaving, and yet the time frame of even the neighbor don't even match the description of even when the eyewitnesses saw that they see her. That is so messed up. The traveling lane is so messed up. The traveling aspect. Let me see. I would in fact love to ask the neighbor, even in 2018, what do they feel about Asia still being missing 18 years later and her still not being found? I would love to ask that neighbor that. Is there a sense of sadness knowing that you didn't intervene and stop her walking or anything, and yet once again the time frame does not add up with what the father said? None of the timing adds up. What even the neighbor saying that? That is just so, that is just, that I think if I was, oh my goodness, I think if I was a neighbor and I had nothing to do with that, as in the child's disappearance, I think I will feel a great deep sense of remorse. I will feel so much. I think that would be traumatizing in itself on my end. If I was a neighbor and I lived somewhere on the same street as a child that goes missing, and yet I didn't report that to the parents as I was watching that child just leave out her house at a particular time, whatever time, and I didn't just contact the parents right away automatically to say to them, your child is leaving. Your child is going away and she's 9 years old, and not only that, she didn't have a coat on. That's the first thing a neighbor would have saw and knew that something was wrong. The child is out here in this coat. I got on the coat and she ain't got on the coat. I'm thinking a neighbor would have even provided their own coat. I'm thinking a neighbor would have intervened all the way on that. To say, why is a young girl leaving, and that's my neighbor and I know her by name. I know her by name as well as age, and I in fact more than likely know what school she goes to or went to. And on top of that, she doesn't have a coat on to shield her, to prevent the cold from getting to her. Why don't I provide a coat to her or some sort? All this whole thing is messed up and a mess. Because see, something about that is not right, pertaining to even the neighbor themselves, which is why if that neighbor is black, I can see why the black community is in such a mess it is in today. There's in fact a no snitch policy pertaining to even the black community, where even a individual will watch a young child just leave out her home and walk away and not even think to provide a coat or something, and just think, I'm not going to get involved with that. But then when the child comes up missing, then they want to be the first individual to say, well, I seen her, and then not say anything else. Or where they didn't provide a coat or nothing. Or not even a ride or nothing. That's why, in fact, the black community is in the hell as it is. The no snitch policy. Pertaining to even missing children coming up and being not found. Because that's to know that if a neighbor knew that they saw Asia leaving at whatever time, despite the timing being mismatched, and no telling where the neighbor was coming from, or even the father himself, where he was coming from. The father, you don't know, even the father could have lied and went into the house, or even Asia's mother could have had something to do with it and lied about their whereabouts. Everybody is lying about their whereabouts. But I'm just saying, using a neighbor for example, to live on the same street as a child is to say you could have knew that child just enough to know her by name, to step foot in front of a parent and say that you seen her. So you had to have seen her at any other time, even looking out your window or wherever, whether day or nighttime, seen a child. That's a personal matter, as an aspect that even a person living on the same street had to have known Asia herself, and yet possibly may or may have not known the child enough, even for that individual to say have been inside of Asia's house. I wonder if the neighbor ever, I asked that before, could that neighbor have been inside of Asia's house before? And possibly have had a key. The neighbor have had a key to Asia Degree's home. The neighbor. I don't think so. That don't seem right either. That don't seem right either, because if a neighbor was to have a key and be in and out of, say, the Degree family home, the neighbor, then that's to say that the neighbor possibly could have at times also babysat Asia or O'Brien from time to time, and possibly no one has stated. Could that sort of thing have been down? A neighbor, friendly neighbor, have babysat Asia sometimes. See, all that is questionable, and it should be. And I'm not removing nothing or taking nothing off a tape. It all sticks right here. Sometimes individuals, grown adults, allow their children to be kept and babysat by people, and yet they don't say the names of the individuals of when children go missing. As in the no snitch policy in the black community of what I spoke on and I told. Where you allow people babysit your children, and then when something like this happens, you don't say. That sort of thing is happening with the Relisha Rudd case right now, and pertaining to her not being found and all this other mess of people having babysitters or whatever, and then nobody wanting to snitch and come out and say, well, you know, sometimes such and such was keeping, even if they kept the child for a day or a night or something. Yes. Even Asia's aunts and uncles need to be questioned as well. The aunts and uncles are who Asia was known and prone to spend the night over sometimes. They have to be questioned as well. Because as I stated before, even those individuals had to have had a key to the Asia Degree home. Yes, they have had to. I can see that sort of thing, because to be an aunt and uncle is to say you're a brother and not a cousin. You're a brother or a sister and not a cousin to an Asia Degree's parents or something. Enough for them to want to give you a key to get in and out of the home if need be, if say one of the parents don't make it home in time enough to check on their own kids, such as the Degree kids. That has to be questioned as well. I think I'm going to end this video out because it's long like all the other ones, but that's all to be said for now. Another thing I'm going to question is the green and green. Green and green. Green car, green marker. What is that? No. Green and green and green. Green, green and green. Green marker. Green vehicle. And the shirt in Asia Degree's age progression photo of that shirt she wears in her age progression photo is in fact green. So 3 green colors. That green marker was Asia's marker. Maybe or maybe not, right? Could have been the individual that set all that stuff up, right? That could have been theirs, but put her fingerprints on it to make it look like it was hers. But green sometimes pointing to the direction. First of all, we have to define what green is, what it represents, as in what it stands for. It's the specification of the color green. Green oftentimes mean nature. It can mean forestry, but it does mean nature more than anything. But it can also mean greed. It can mean money. It can mean jealousy. It can mean any of those things. The color of green. Green can also, when it comes to home burglary and stuff like that, done by criminals, the green color could also, I'm saying the green marker, could also point to green points in the realm of direction. For somebody to want to, criminals would know that. In order for somebody to say break into a home, sometimes they in fact mark the home with something by leaving an object outside, such as a can, a Pepsi, Coke product bottle or eraser or something crazy like that to mark the premises with the color of something, which means something to the criminals. And sometimes, once again, a green marker could in fact mean direction, as in where something has gone or been led to, right? So to have a pencil such as Asia's, I'm going to talk about that later, the pencil aspect, it said a city or a state on it, and to have her stuff strong like that is to also question the direction. I did that before already. But also I'm thinking the age progression photo of Asia wearing that green shirt ties in as well, pertaining to FBI and them thinking a woodsman, as they stated, a woodsman could have possibly had something to do with Asia's disappearance. That could be why Asia in her age progression photo is wearing a green shirt. I wonder if anybody ever considered such. Why Asia is in a age progression photo. Yes, they progressed her age, as in her looks, years away, as in years forward, to make her appear much more older, as in where she would have stood today in looks and age. That shirt she has on, the collar and everything, is in fact green. And it matches, yes, it does. It matches the green car as well as the green marker. And once again, green marking usually means direction. To place a green marker means direction. So that's why I'm in question too, of why she has that green shirt on in the age digression. In the age progression photo. More than likely it's because FBI kind of sensed that a woodsman had something to do with her disappearance. And to have green represents nature, which is why possibly FBI would put her in a green shirt to begin with, to let whoever know, if they live amongst nature, that look, there's a possibly you had something to do with this child, and not only that, we're going to put her in a green shirt just to show you that we sense that you have had something to do with that or something. There's a reason why FBI would even paint the girl's looks up. Yes, progress her in age, but put the green shirt on more than anything on her, to tell the individual we are in fact looking for you, or something in that form and fashion. I can see even into that. The description of why would they put a green shirt on Asia and put it out as a missing person. Because that represents nature, green. So I think that's all to be said for now. I'm going to end this video out because my phone is ringing, and I'll be back.